Thank you, Max, for the kind introduction, and welcome everyone, and good afternoon. And so today I'm going to talk about Food Nation and what we eat and why it matters about what we eat. So being in Singapore, as you probably are aware, it has one of the highest food variety and choice per capita of food consumption, I think around the globe. And you have cuisines from all over the world, and the individual dishes within those cuisines are really endless. And as you probably are also aware, that Singapore is now a proud nation where you can get the cheapest Michelin-starred restaurant in the whole of the world. I mean, about $2. So I think that's the claim to fame for Singapore. My question to you is that does the increased food choice and consumption actually come at an increased health cost? So particularly because chronic diseases that are associated with diet, for example, type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular diseases, have been on the rise over the last few decades. And is it partly to do with actually what we eat and how our food habits actually changed over the last 4 decades or so, because our genes hasn't. So what is actually really defining why we are actually getting more of these chronic diseases associated with diet? So I take you actually to my next slide, which actually shows you the distribution of diabetes around the globe. And what you can clearly see is that in Asia combined, the total number of diabetics actually far outweighs the number of diabetics in the rest of the world. So it's actually more than 50%. And when we last sort of counted back in 2013, it's more than 200 million. And the total diabetics actually around the globe is actually going to go up even by 2050, and we are expecting about 500 million diabetics. And 4 of the top 10 countries where diabetes is most prevalent actually come from China, India, Indonesia, and Japan. So why is it that in Asia we actually have more people suffering diabetes? So what you can see in this slide is that you have the body mass index, which is increasing in this order, and the diabetes prevalence. And this is actually the Caucasian population in Europe, and these are actually the Asian population above it. So what you see is that even at a lower body mass index, you actually have a higher prevalence of diabetes in Asians. So obviously, putting on weight is actually more detrimental by the look of it in Asians compared to the Caucasians. So why is it that when we put on weight, it's actually worse than sort of the other ethnicities? So one of the reasons is probably to do with where we put on the extra body fat when we actually consume extra food. And of course, my colleague later actually will talk to you a little bit more about sort of energy regulation and how we can actually control that, etc. So, and it's not only actually where we put on the weight, and that also has an implication to how we respond to eating food. So when we actually eat food, the way our blood glucose actually changes over time is actually also not as good as how the Caucasian population responds to. So what you actually clearly see is that for when young people in their 20s were given the same food, you see a much greater increase in blood glucose over a 2-hour period than young people actually who are from a Caucasian background and given the same food. So this is actually used white bread as the food, and 75 grams of available carbohydrates. And this is something that we actually regularly eat. So what you also see on the right-hand set of figures is that the plasma insulin response is also higher. So it's not because the plasma insulin level is actually lower that you have the higher glucose, but it's actually to do with how the insulin functions. And that is what we actually call insulin resistance, or a lowering of the insulin sensitivity. So our insulin in the Asian population doesn't necessarily work as well as some of the other ethnic group people. So this is, again, one of the other reasons why we have to be much more vigilant about what we eat and how we can actually control our blood glucose through what we eat. So, so given our Asian phenotype, and of course our food is also very different. So our food, our preference to food, so what we like to eat, which actually is defined by the palate, and they are very different. And in combination, our response to food, which is our phenotype, our palate, which is our preference to food, and of course the food that we eat, in combination actually gives rise to our health. So this is a very important point, because this is exactly the reason why we ought to do nutrition research in Asia, which is suitable for the Asian palate, Asian food, and the Asian phenotype. So is diet and health a new concept, I ask you? And the answer is actually no. Sort of over generation in sort of traditional Chinese medicine, as well as Indian Ayurvedic medicine, food has always been associated with medicine. Question is that there are some folklores, etc., and these claims and counterclaims has not been tested properly with rigorous controlled trials. And in our center, at the Clinical Nutrition Research Center, we are trying exactly to do that. So this is actually the center, which some of you may be aware of. And we do, this is a state-of-the-art center, which is very unique in whole of Southeast Asia. And I have also worked in sort of UK and Europe before, and I can vouch that this center is as good, if not better, than majority of the nutrition research center around the globe. And we have the whole set of potential measurements that we can do, which is related to what we eat. So starting from detailed body composition analysis to our energy expenditure, which my colleagues will actually later talk to you about. We also have analytical equipments, which basically we can measure sort of blood levels and urine levels of different analytes, etc., and other monitoring capabilities, including vascular function and how our 24-hour glucose is monitored, and our physical activity using the accelerometer and 24-hour blood pressure monitoring. So these are actually all the things that we are sort of exploring at the center, and we are particularly involved. The theme of this One North Festival is to celebrate research, innovation, creativity, and enterprise. And in the Clinical Nutrition Research Center, we are doing just that. We are involved in research into nutrition, which is suited to Asian phenotype, Asian palate, using Asian foods, and this is, I've already alluded to that before to you. We are also involved in innovation by altering food components and structure to enhance the health benefits of individual food and food components. With regards to creativity, there are lots of things that we currently eat, but we don't know whether these actually foods are going to be having added functional values to what actually is available from the nutrients that's in there. So that includes things like phytochemicals and other bioactive components. And we regularly actually work with local SMEs and also big food companies to develop and test novel foods, which again has additional benefits. So I want to give you a bit of an overview of the kind of research that we do within the center, and we are involved in actually exploring energy balance, so both the energy intake and energy expenditure side of the equation. And we also explore how different carbohydrates, different proteins and fats actually can work to improve our health outcomes. But what I want to stress to you is actually that these are all food-based research. So while we are exploring nutrient and components, we are specifically doing food-based research using local foods. And of course, we are interested in things like plant phytochemicals. We have a study ongoing actually looking at mixed spices and whether we can actually improve vascular health as well as glucose control, etc. So again, the overall aim, just to summarize, will be to sort of generate evidence-based recommendation on foods and food ingredients using local Asian foods. So just to give you a bit of a taster of the research that we do, and do excuse my pun, we have done a study on having oat and barley flour instead of the traditionally used wheat flour to make muffins, and can we actually reduce the glycemic response? And what you see actually in the orange, sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button. So what you can see in the orange and the red figure is that they're the oat and the barley flour muffins. They all contain exactly the same amount of available carbohydrates, and we did this in 12 volunteers in a randomized design and a crossover trial, so everybody was their own control. And what we clearly saw was that muffins made with oat and barley had a much better glycemic response as compared to muffins made with refined wheat flour. In my next slide, I've also given you a slide where we explored local proteins. So we added local proteins to a rice-based meal, and again, it's the same amount of protein, and we wanted to compare. I mean, protein is already known to help with reducing the glycemic response, but what we wanted to know particularly is whether local proteins such as soy bean curd can actually also help with that. And what you can see there is that the soybean curd response was actually as good as the fish and the chicken, and it's actually much lower than actually the control where people ate rice on its own. And again, this was a crossover trial in 15 volunteers. So in addition to that, we are also exploring other aspects. So far I've spoken about food components. Now I'm just going to sort of briefly mention to you about food structure and texture research that we do. So we alter the processing method or the preparation methods of foods to see that we can improve health benefits of the food associated in the long term. So we've actually done a study on glycemic response of fruit puree versus fruit being cut in small pieces. Also, we have done a study on baked versus steamed bread, and to see how structural alteration of the bread due to the baking or the steaming method contributes to the glycemic response. Currently, we are exploring converting liquid oil, so the liquid oil is what we normally have, into gel by adding fiber to it, and to see if the lipid response actually can be improved as a result of that. And my colleague Agnes Tay will actually also speak to you about research that she has done on energy density and how we can alter the actual energy content of the food by just altering the actual energy density, and how that can have a significant effect on our appetite regulation and the amount of food that we eat. So the ultimate aim really will be to engage with food manufacturers and outlets to provide you, the members of the public in Singapore, with healthy foods, keeping in mind, of course, the taste, convenience, and the cost. So on that note, I propose to you that from the Food Nation as the title of our project, can we actually transform Singapore into a smart food nation? Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll hand you over to Dr. Tay. Thank you.
Thanks very much for the lovely introduction, Sumanto. It's a great privilege to be here to share some of the exciting research that we are doing at CNRC. So I'm going to start off today's talk by talking about energy balance. So there are two components in energy balance. We have energy intake and energy expenditure. So today my talk will cover energy intake side of the story, and the next speaker, Dr. Tan, will be talking about energy expenditure. So we are in energy balance when our energy intake is equivalent to our energy expenditure. If our energy intake is less than energy expenditure, over time, we may experience weight loss. On the other hand, if our energy intake is greater than energy expenditure, after a prolonged period, we may put on weight. So how much energy does our body require in a day? This table is adapted from Singapore Health Promotion Board, and we can see that for males and females, and several factors will influence our energy requirement. That depends on our gender, whether you are males or females, the age groups, as well as the activity level. So for an adult male aged between 18 and 59 years, with low to moderate physical activity level, the energy requirement will be roughly around 2,200 to 2,700 calories. And for females, this will be around 1,700 to 2,100 calories. So can I just ask all of you a question? On this slide, I have two pictures of a meal. Which meal do you think is more filling? Please pull up your hand if you think the picture on the left is more filling. Okay, a few of you, great. So who thinks the picture on the right is more filling? The majority of you? Great. Okay, so we can see that the energy content of the meal on the right-hand side is 1,575 calories. And interestingly, the picture on the left also contains the same amount of energy. So why is it? Why do we think that the picture on the right is more filling? So research has shown that the characteristics of foods as perceived by our senses, such as sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing, plays an important role in our food intake. So when we smell the food, when we see the food, if it's a lot of food, and when we actually taste the food and hear the sound of the food, like potato crisps, it can actually either stimulate our appetite or suppress our appetite. And that will have a profound effect on our human health. So now I'm going to talk on two studies we recently completed at CNRC. So the first study, we used ramen, and the second study, we used soy milk. So in the first study, 27 participants, young lean males, took part in this study, and they were asked to come for 5 times, and each time they would receive a ramen for lunch. And we have the 600 calories ramen in the middle, which is their usual lunch, which represents about 30% of their energy requirement, 25 to 30% for young lean males. And on the left-hand side, we have 2 ramen, which has the calories removed, a bit less calorie, 160 calories and 300 calories, but they are exactly the same as the control, the usual ramen, meaning that they look the same, they taste the same, and they smell the same. And on the right side, we also have 2 with excess calories, about 900 calories and 1,200 calories. So there was a difference of about 7.2-fold difference between the lowest energy ramen and the highest energy ramen. And it is really important to highlight that all the ramens taste the same, smell the same, and they had the same amount of volume, about 650. Okay, so how do we actually produce different ramen, like different energy content, without changing the taste, the smell, and the appearance of it? So for instance, ramen noodle was replaced with, a little bit of them was replaced with zucchini noodle in the low energy ramen. And for the high energy ramen, we added some canola oil and maltodextrin, which is a tasteless carbohydrate, to produce a higher energy soup. And also, we use different amount of sesame seeds, and the thickness of the fish cakes vary a bit between the ramen. And in terms of the seasoning and garnish, it was equal amount for all 5 ramens, like the spring onion, bean sprout, seaweed, and sesame oil. So participants were asked to consume the same breakfast on all test days. And we can see from this figure, on the x-axis, we have different types of ramen, and on the y-axis, we have the total daily energy intake for the day. And we can see that as the energy for the ramen goes up, the total daily energy intake actually goes up as well. And there was no compensation for missing calories for the low energy ramen. Similarly, there was no compensation for the added calories from the high energy ramen, meaning that people do not compensate by eating more when we give them a small, low energy lunch, and similarly, and people do not compensate by eating less when we give them bigger lunch. And this indicates that meals that are matched for sensory properties, for the taste, the smell, the appearance, and also volume, may promote either weight gain or weight loss over a long period of time. So from the first study, we can see that it is surprisingly easy to change the energy content of a meal. And what happens if we remove or add calories to an existing product like soy milk? So in the second study, 29 young lean males were invited to take part in this study. They were given about 450 ml of soy milk, and they were asked to come 3 times. So each time they consume a different soy milk. And from this figure, we can see on the x-axis, on the x-axis, we have different types of soy milk, and on the y-axis, we have the energy intake, total for lunch and the study drink. So we can see that similar to what we found in the first study, when participants were given a higher energy soy milk, they consumed more calories that day. On the other hand, when they were given smaller, lower energy soy milk, they consumed less for that day. Okay. So what does this mean? Can we actually translate this kind of studies into like a change in body weight? Or even does the high or low energy intake actually sustain over time? So here we have 2 studies. Participants were given either bigger portion size or smaller portion size over 10 to 11 days. So let's focus on the figure on the left. So in this study, males and females were given the standard portion size for 11 days. And that's represented in the dotted lines. And during another study period, they were given 50% larger portion, meaning they are eating 150% more. So what happens? Will they actually compensate by eating less later? Surprisingly, anecdotally, participants were saying that their pants were getting tighter. At the same time, they did not change their food intake. They continued to just eat more throughout the whole study period. And the accumulative energy intake increase was about 4,600 during that 11 days. So on the right is a little bit different. In this case, what they did is they replaced participants' usual lunch with a portion-controlled smaller lunch. So what we see is after 10 days, the cumulative energy intake decreased significantly. Participants did not eat more like for snack or dinner after they had a smaller lunch. So participants actually lost about half a kilo at the end of this 10-day study. So these 2 studies really indicate that we can actually promote energy intake or decrease energy intake just by using portion size, and the energy intake is actually sustained over time. People still do not compensate. All right, so based on the studies that I've shared with you today, low-calorie and high-calorie foods and beverages may result in weight gain or weight loss. And efforts should really be made to maintain the sensory properties such as the taste, appearance, and also the smell and texture of the foods. And also, what are the implications of these studies? So we know that it has been estimated about 30% of the elderly general population in Singapore, they are malnourished. So for the malnourished elderly, we can easily provide them with a high-energy meal to actually increase their energy intake. On the other hand, for individuals who would like to actually lose a little bit of weight, you can easily just consume a smaller lunch or just a smaller portion over time, and that may result in weight loss over a long period of time. So we eat in response to our food environment, and we should all choose our foods wisely. Thank you. And I'll hand this time over to my colleague, Dr. Tan.
Can everyone hear me? Yep. So, good afternoon, everyone. And I would like to start with a slide that you have seen from the previous presentation by Dr. Tay. And this is a slide showing you the energy balance in a human being. So in order to maintain weight, as mentioned earlier, you want to maintain a balance between your energy intake and energy expenditure. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit about energy expenditure. So when we talk about energy expenditure, the first thing we think about usually is your exercise, right? When you say, I want to burn more calories, then the first thing you hear, exercise more. But surprisingly, the biggest proportion of energy expenditure in human actually comes from this component we call basal metabolic rate. So it is a component where the energy is spent or is used to maintain your body function. For example, your breathing, your pumping of your heart. So these are the calories that you need to do those kind of activities. And not surprisingly, it is very highly correlated with your muscle mass. So your muscle is basically the place where you burn energy, and also your organ as well. And the second part, of course, is the energy expenditure coming from your physical activity. So not necessarily all from your exercise, but it can be from your occupational related physical activity. For example, walking to the train station, taking your bus, for example. Those require energy as well. And the last part is probably something that we don't think about very often, is your diet-related energy expenditure. So meaning that the energy you burn in order to digest your food, to absorb your food, and also to dispose the waste from your body. So as a nutritionist and also as a dietitian, I'm very much interested in this component of the energy expenditure, and I'll talk a bit about it later. So how do we measure energy expenditure? So this is something that I would like to share with you. So energy expenditure is almost like lighting a candle. So when you light a candle, heat is being released. So this is what we refer to as energy expenditure. And traditionally, that's how people measure it. But as you know that this measuring temperature can be very, very labor intensive. It requires a lot of control. That's why we have an indirect method of measuring energy expenditure. So meaning that, again, using the candle as an example, you need oxygen to light the candle, and when you burn the candle, you produce carbon dioxide. So the same principle, we want to measure oxygen consumption and also carbon dioxide production. And to do that, we can either use a small bubble-like device where you put over your head, and this device is connected to the computer where your oxygen consumption and carbon dioxide production is measured. So this method is, we have this method at our research center, and it's usually used for a short period measurement, so something like between 30 minutes, maybe up to an hour, 2 hours. But we also have this whole room calorimeter or whole body calorimeter at the Clinical Nutrition Research Center, where, as you can see, it's almost like a small hotel room equipped with bed, toilet, computer, TV, and also a sink. So it's an airtight chamber. Someone can walk in there and stay for a few hours and maybe can stay up to a few weeks. Has been done in other countries in the past. And the same principle, we measure oxygen consumption and carbon dioxide production. And this is something very unique, and only one in the Southeast Asia, and only about 30 plus in the world. And this is an example from a different country, but they all look very similar. But in the clinical setting, in case you don't have access to this or this, what can you do? We have the equation that you can use as well. So this is an equation developed by our professor, where based on your gender, your age range, and also your body weight, you can roughly estimate your basal metabolic rate, which is about 70% of what you actually need in a day. All right, so that's another simple method. right, so when it comes to weight regulation or weight maintenance, or if you are overweight, you are trying to lose weight, what's the goal that, when it comes to energy expenditure? So there are 3 objectives that we want to achieve. The first one is to make sure that you maintain your body muscle mass or your organ mass so that you don't lose the factory that you burn energy and burn fat. So that's the first one. The second part is, of course, to increase your energy, try to increase your energy expenditure. That can be done through your exercise or through your diet, which I'll show you a few examples. And then, of course, we want to burn as much fat as possible as energy source. So those are the 3 objectives. So let me start with the most obvious example, which is the physical activity or exercise. So based on the Singaporean government's recommendation, you can see that we are recommended to do about 150 minutes of physical activity per week. So not any type of physical activity. It has to be of moderate high intensity. So a few examples here are here for you to see. So like jogging, playing tennis, badminton, rowing, power yoga. So these are a few examples. So we need to aim for about 150 minutes a week of those. What if you don't have time or you are not really interested in doing some physical activity? So in our research center, we actually measured the energy that you use when you do different household activities. For example, like doing laundry, cooking, cleaning, organizing items. And on this slide, you can see that on the y-axis, you have the amount of energy you use per minute to do different kind of activities. So those in blue are the activities that we actually measured. And you can see that the energy expenditure is between 1.5 to close to 3 calories per minute of doing different kind of household activities. And just to give you some examples of what other activities that are more comparable to that level of energy expenditure. So you have like Tai Chi, fishing, they are all about the same amount of calories you are burning. So in case you are too busy to do physical activity or exercise or go to your gym, you can also do your household activities, and we should aim for about 45 minutes per day, every day. So they burn less energy, so you need a slightly more amount of time to burn the same amount of calories. All right, so now the last part, it's what I call food-based approach. So basically looking at different dietary components that potentially can help you burn energies and fat as well. So there are many, many out there if you look at the scientific evidence. But today I'm going to give you an overview of 4. The reason why I picked these 4 is because I think they are easy to follow. They can be translated into something that you can do at home. And also it sort of they sort of relate to what Dr. Tay and Dr. Howder spoke to you earlier as well. So the first one is protein. So higher protein diets has been shown to increase your energy expenditure. That's the first thing, because your body needs more energy to dispose of the nitrogen waste in the body after you consume protein. And also, it has been shown that for people with slightly higher body weight, having a higher protein diet can actually help you to burn fat as well. And if you burn more fat, it means that you retain less fat in your body, and over time, you may be better off from that. For people who are trying to lose weight, having a higher protein diet has been shown to help retain muscle mass during weight loss, so meaning that you lose most of your weight as body fat rather than muscle mass. And by retaining that, you actually maintain your basal metabolic rate, which is about 70% of your energy. All right. And my previous study has shown that no matter what type of protein sources you use in the diet, you get the same effect as well. So meaning that if you get your protein from the plant-based sources, for example, your beans, your soy, you get the same effect from if you eat meat, poultry, etc. And something related to what Dr. Tay was telling you about was that higher protein diet can help you to suppress your appetite as well, meaning that you don't feel the need to eat more. And then the second thing is the capsaicin. So capsaicin is a pungent compound found in mainly chili and also black pepper and ginger. So it's a pungent compound that gives you the heat when you eat the chili. So it has been shown that having capsaicin in the diet can actually help you to burn energy and also to burn fat. But the doses that have been used in clinical trials so far range from 20 to 150 milligrams. So that maybe, sounds very alien to you, but to change it into, for example, equivalent of bird eye chili, that's about 4 to 30 chilies a day. So we are talking of a big dose, okay? So don't get too excited about, go and eat a ton or a kilo of chili today. And also research has shown that there's a difference between users and non-users. So what that means is that if you eat chili day in, day out, you probably don't get the benefit as much as from people, compared to people who don't eat chili very often. And also research has also shown that if you have higher weight, you tend to get smaller effect as well. So it's not all good news. It's about balancing it. So, and then the next thing is your polyunsaturated fat. So polyunsaturated fats are fats you find in, you find from oily fish, your nuts and seeds, your plant oils like sunflower oil or corn oil. So those are the polyunsaturated fat in the diet. And unlike the previous two examples, it doesn't increase your energy expenditure. However, it does help you to burn more fat. So the oxidation of fat is slightly higher after you consume a higher polyunsaturated fat diet. But however, I do want to caution you that, fat is also high in energy as well. So when you hear that, it helps you to burn more fat, don't take me wrong, don't go and say, oh, I should eat more polyunsaturated fat, because at the end of the day, it's still very high in energy. So the strategy here is that try to swap. So take out the saturated fat and perhaps replace with polyunsaturated fat. That's probably the better way to go. And then the last example I have today is the tree or the groundnuts. So they are good sources of unsaturated fat, so it can be monounsaturated or can be polyunsaturated fats, depends on what type of nuts you eat, and they are good sources of protein and fiber as well. And we know that all these different components in the diet can actually help in a few aspects of your energy balance, and one is, of course, your energy expenditure, and also helps you to burn more fat as well as energy source. And you don't need a lot. You need a handful of about 30 to 45 grams a day. You get the effect of that. And also the last thing, of course, is, again, it suppresses appetite as well, so you don't feel the urge to eat more afterwards. So I've given you a few examples here, but as mentioned earlier, that doesn't mean that, we want you to go and eat a lot of this food. So be wise, select wisely, spice up your diet, and what I've mentioned so far is actually consistent with what HPB is recommending, My Healthy Plate, where you should have a quarter of your plate as protein, choose healthy oils, be active. So if you do those, if you follow those recommendations, you're probably well taken care of in terms of maintaining your energy expenditure. So I would like to summarize the 3 talks from today, from Dr. Howder and from Dr. Tay as well. So you may have heard from us as 3 separate talks, but hopefully we have convinced you that what we talk about today actually works together. So from your food components that can influence your energy intake and also can influence your energy expenditure. And we know that these 2 are closely related. Hopefully that, if we find a balance, we help to maintain body weight. And the goal is very simple. It's common for 3 of us as well. It's hopefully that we can achieve better health over time. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Tan. Do we have any questions?
Thank you for that. Thank you. My name is Mario. I wanted to ask your feedback or your point of view on meal frequency and meal portions, and what that gives as an influence on what you just shared with us.
Do you want me to go? Well, just anyone. Do you want to take the question?
Hello. Yeah, in terms of meal frequency, some people say that nibbling is better than having like 3 set meals, and on the other hand, you have another lot of people say that, oh, I actually prefer to have 3 set meals. So at the end of the day, it's still the total amount of energy that you consume a day. So as Dr. Tan mentioned earlier, some of the foods that we consume may suppress appetite. So for instance, if you eat like nuts, a handful of nuts at afternoon tea or even morning tea time, it can probably suppress your energy, the lunch intake or dinner intake, and lead to an overall smaller intake for the entire day. So in this scenario, I think it's really what works best for you. If you really get very hungry, you probably will be better off to have a little bit of snack than trying to like hold on for 4 or 5 hours and you will just scoff out all the food. Yeah.
Hi, my question is for Dr. Halder. You emphasized in your speech why it was very important to do nutrition research in Asia, and especially on the foods that are popular in Asia. Is this something that you think historically has been lacking? And moving forward, what are the areas that you think are the key areas for further research in this context?
It's a great question. Thank you for your question. Yes, the short answer is that we haven't really had quality research coming out with Asian food, looking specifically, focusing on Asian phenotypes. So even some of the data that I have shown you with regards to responses with Asian food actually has been done in research outside of Asia per se. Specifically, sort of the differences in responses, etc., are mainly done in sort of migrant population of Asians who have actually moved sort of in US or UK, etc. So I think that it's very important that we actually do it in this environment, and of course going forward, I think we have to probably go away from focusing on individual ingredients and individual foods, but look at the food as a whole, and that not only is just food components, but also the food environment. And again, we have a multidisciplinary research team who are actually looking at the environmental aspect, the psychology aspect of food choice, etc.